Welcome to another episode of the Neoliberal Round podcast. We have breaking news. John Anthony Castro, in an audio message to us just moments ago, says that he will be in Washington, D.C. on July 25th to file a federal lawsuit in federal court against the Federal Commission to declare Trump an ineligible candidate and to have him regulated as such, and to also bring into question Donald Trump's constitutional eligibility under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to even be on the ballot or be a candidate. Again, breaking news coming in that John Anthony Castro, the U.S. 2024 presidential candidate, will be in Washington, D.C. on July 25th to file a federal lawsuit in federal court against the Federal Commission to declare Trump a candidate, an ineligible candidate, and to have him regulated as such, and to bring into question Donald Trump's constitutional eligibility under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to even be on the ballot or be a candidate. Mr. Castro said also that he will be in D.C. because he filed a federal election. He filed a federal election commission complaint against former President Donald Trump, and that he is a registered Republican candidate. And July 23rd will mark the 120th day since he filed the complaint against former President Mr. Donald J. Trump, which was about 4 months ago, which actually green-lights him to be able to file this federal lawsuit in federal court against the Federal Commission to declare Trump an ineligible candidate and to have him regulated as such. And of course, if you had listened to a previous podcast where we had interviewed Mr. Castro for about 2 hours, where he talks about his platform and he talks about this particular issue, and he also had revealed to us some breaking news as it relates to the January 6th hearing, indicating to us that Mr. Trump, that the January 6th, the uprising was called an American experiment. It wasn't an experiment. It was orchestrated. It was 2 days in the making. And there were strategic moves. And he had alluded to that. And some of you might be hearing some of that coming out now. But if you follow the podcast and follow my website, theneoliberal.com and ronaldocmckenzie.com, follow my news feeds and blogs and so on, you probably might have been party or privy to early news. And if you're just following, I apologize, but welcome to the Neoliberal Round podcast. Now, we will actually, I have the audio of Mr. Castro speaking to us and moments ago, and I will actually play that for you. But we will be sharing. We will be we will be at the press release, because what he plans to do is he will file this and then have a press conference right away. And we we will be covering it, and we are also going to be sharing the details of this with other news media sometime in the week. Mr. Castro will make the details of this filing and the press conference available, and we will also share it with the public, and we will also share it with other podcasts and media houses, because this is major. This is major, and this is very important. This is very important. But here is Mr. Castro moments ago.
Hey, Ronaldo, it's John. Hey, so I wanted to give you a heads up. On July 25th, I'm going to be in Washington, D.C., because I filed a FEC complaint, Federal Election Commission complaint, against Donald Trump. And I'm a registered Republican presidential candidate. And July 23rd marks the 120th day since I filed the complaint, pretty much 4 months ago. That actually green lights me to be able to file a federal lawsuit in federal court against the Federal Election Commission to declare Trump a candidate, to have him regulated as such. And then that way I can also bring into question his constitutional eligibility under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to even be on the ballot or be a candidate. I'm going to be putting together a press release this coming week, and I wanted to give it to you and see.
Welcome back. That was Mr. John Anthony Castro earlier today. And right now, just before we get into the Roe versus Wade conversations, which is the topic for today, I just wanted to know that I will be presenting at this year's AGLSP conference. AGLSP conference this year. And the AGLSP is the Association of Graduates in Liberal Studies program. It's the Association of Graduate Liberal Studies program, and they're having a conference, and it's a yearly conference, and this will be on October 10 to October 12, 2022 in San Antonio, Texas. And I will give you some more details as it relates to this, but I'm going to be presenting on neoliberalism, globalization, income inequality, poverty and resistance, which of course is the title of my book that came out about a year ago. And I have a follow-up to that book and another book working on. One that looks at privilege, power, position, status, and secrets to unlocking divine intervention. But the one that is upcoming is the second edition to neoliberalism, but it has a new title. It's Neoliberalism Considered. But I will be in San Antonio, Texas this year, October 10 to 12, and I will be presenting. So I'm looking forward. I think it's open to the public. It's open to the public, to scholars, students, and professionals. And there's one other news, one other event that I must bring to your attention. I believe, my cousin is dominating the junior 400 meter hurdles event. And she will be at the Junior Olympics in North Carolina this year at the end of July. And we're asking you to support the Junior U.S. Olympic team. The Junior U.S. Olympic team. Of course, I have some family. A member of my family who is actually a top junior 400 meter hurdler, will be running in this year's Olympic, and we are the team have come together. The Olympics, the American Olympics team, the Junior Olympic team, they have come together and they have started a GoFundMe page, and I'm inviting you guys to donate to that. And you can go to Facebook. You can go on my Facebook, Ronaldo C. McKenzie, or Ronaldo.McKenzie, that is on Facebook, or you can go on my Twitter, Ronaldo McKenzie, and you might see me pin that to my. I'm actually promoting this particular event. I am not the organizer of the event. The event is organized, of the GoFundMe page. It's organized. Shana Grubb is the organizer, and this is what she has said. She said, "Hi, this fundraiser was created to raise money to assist our track and field athletes travel to North Carolina for AAU Junior Olympics. Our young athletes have been working hard all year to compete on this national stage, and we would like to alleviate some of the burdens associated with traveling for this competition. We are asking for support from our family, friends, and members of the community. Sincerely, Metro Eagles soaring high in Southeast Queens. And so we're asking you to donate. So far, they have raised about $3,045, and their goal is $6,000, 43 donors. So we are asking you to continue we are asking you to support this venture. And if you go to thenearlyboard.com or RonaldoCMcKenzie.com sometime later or tomorrow, you might see me talking and promoting this particular event. This is the Nearly Board Round podcast. We'll be right back after these messages, and when we come back, we will continue with part 2 of the series, looking at the Roe versus Wade conversations. Welcome back to the episode. Now, coming up on this episode, as this is part 2, looking at the overturning of Roe, and of course, as I spoke with in this episode, we will have I will present an introduction of some arguments, and then following that, you'll hear Mr. John Anthony Castro, who will respond to those comments. After Mr. Castro responds to those comments, and we'll also talk about the whole issue of Roe, overturning of Roe, we will then have Dr. Nolan Fontaine will join us on the show, and we will have the conversation together, looking at Mr. Castro's comments and commenting on that as well. And then after that, we will play another audio commentary of Mr. Castro, who, of course, he submitted 2 responses to some questions that we had to ask concerning the overturning of Roe, because we wanted to get his comments. And he also commented on the January 6 hearings, since that is very important as it relates to his campaign and the way that he is taking his campaign on this particular challenge of Mr. Trump. And so following this, this is broken up in several segments. First, you will have I will present a 17 minutes introduction to some general conversations. Then you'll have Mr. Castro, who will respond to some of the comments, and will also make some points as it relates to over the overturning of Roe. Then, of course, Dr. Nolan Fontaine will join the program, and we will discuss this overturning of Roe and some other issues. Then you will have Mr. Castro, who will come back and talk about the January 6 hearings, and then Dr. Fontaine and myself will follow up with conversations, and then we will have final thoughts and conclude the episode. So sit back, relax. This is a very full and powerful episode with lots of information to consider. We'll be right back after this. As we think about the issue of Roe versus Wade, I had presented arguments as it relates to the issue of ethics, where there are people who are pro-choice are making the argument that it is the woman's right to choose what to do with her own body. Yet it is not anyone's right to commit suicide, because that is illegal, and that deals with the issue of life. Because as a society, as a people, we are the ethical thing, or the moral, when we think about right and wrong and ethics and what is ethical and what is unethical, what is moral, what is amoral or immoral, when we think about the issue of life, we will all agree that life is sacred as a society. And I'm gonna make a very important argument here that one must contend with. And this is the argument here is, those who are pro-choice make the argument that women must have the right to do with their own bodies what they want to do with their own bodies. But people are free, but people aren't totally free to do anything that they want to do. They can pick up a gun and kill somebody. Okay, and it is illegal to commit suicide. So, and then of course, you can do anything that you want to do, but when it has to do with life, that's a completely different issue. And we're not thinking about it in those ways. But that is the argument. And of course, there is the issue of economics, and then there is the issue where one life threatens another life, the fetus or the child's life, the pregnancy might create that, but, and I say to you, we cannot. And there are people who would argue that what about in the issue of rape, and then there are people who would argue, what if it's right now in Brazil, there is an issue, there's a major situation in Brazil right now where a judge has ordered a 10-year-old child who is pregnant and wants to abort the child, the fetus. She was raped, and from that rape she became pregnant. And people are outraged because she wants to abort, but there is a judge that has ordered a stay of the pregnancy. And you might say, what about that? But I am saying to you, we cannot make a general rule, a general right. Because when you raise those instances, they are instances. But we are making a generalization by giving the right to someone to determine what to do with life. And I say to you, and I've already said to you, our approach to life, we have a convenient way of defining things in order to come to conclusions. So we define the fetus as nothing. So that we can move towards justifying ending the fetus through abortion. I mean, and there are those who say fetus is part of a life. I have argued that the fetus is part of life, a vulnerable life that must be protected. And although it is being incubated within the womb, that part of the man is inside of the woman, and he should have a right as well. And the thing is, we cannot argue or fight with life. There's some things we cannot fight with. The way in which the order of things is that women are made in such a way that they help to incubate a fetus towards personhood, and that is life. That's part of life, and the woman cannot have that right, unfortunately, which is a controversial point, but it is something to be considered. It's a point to be considered when you think about it. But as I said to you, so I'm saying to you, there are instances you can bring up as to why a woman might want to abort a child. And we have statistics and we have the data here that we will share with you in a minute. But there are instances why a woman would want to abort a child. But I say to you, it should not just be the woman's prerogative. if the man is part of the whole process and is there with the woman or wants to continue with the child and look after the child and so on. So therefore, so I say to you, we cannot make a general rule based on certain instances. You're talking about some people are poor, but not everybody people are poor who wants to commit abortion. But so because some people are poor and may not be able to raise a child, we should create a general law, a general right, a general rule that says abortion is a constitutional right. And then of course I've said that there's another issue. There's a clash here. The Constitution says that talks about the issue of the right to life. And the right to life, and we have laws to preserve life. Everyone has that right to life, to pursuit of happiness. But then, what if that? But then, you have another constitutional right that says it is okay to abort a child. To abort a life. In a sense, it creates a clash, an ambivalence, where in one part of the Constitution you are preserving life, you are promoting life, and you're protecting life, and in another part of the Constitution you're ending life. That's, in a sense, creates some kind of ambivalence. So I am saying, the general rule, creating a general rule, a general right from instances. And we've always talked about instances cannot be a reason for generalizing, because the instance isn't, you cannot create an instance because now people can utilize that instant. But today we want to move beyond those arguments to consider other issues and to consider some data for you. And if you know and I'm going to present to you Abortion and Women of Color by Susan A. Cohen in gutmarker.org, and I'm looking at the GPR, the Guttmacher Institute, and they did some research and shared some studies, and they say according to the study, the data, it says that behind the numbers, abortion rates have been declining in the United States for a quarter of a century, from a high of 29.3 per 1,000 women aged 15 to 44 in 1981 to an historic low post Roe versus Wade of 19.4 in 2005. The overall number of abortions has been falling too, dropping to 1.2 million in 2005. Now this part is very important, because we're going to look at demographics, and we're going to speak to the issue of proportionality. And when we talk about proportion, it's very important. When you look at a study, you also want to look at proportional relationships. And what is important, because the American culture promotes categories and put people in races and so on. That, I guess, that is important, so as to maintain a particular status quo. But when we look at proportional relationships are relationships between two variables where their ratios are equivalent. Another way to think about them is that in a proportional relationship, one variable is always a constant value times the other. Now, I bring up the point of proportionality or proportional relationships, because it is important when you start to look at the data and looking at behind the numbers. According to Susan Cohen in Guttmacher, or in the Guttmacher Institute Policy Review, currently about 1/3 of all abortions are obtained by white women and 37% are obtained by black women. Latinas comprise a smaller proportion of the number of the women who have abortions, and the rest are obtained by Asians, Pacific Islanders, Native Americans, and women of mixed race. So, what is important here is that currently white women, about 1/3 of all abortions are obtained by white women. 1/3. And then 30% by black women, and then the rest are compromised by smaller proportions, Latinas and others. But if I were to tell you, when you go deeper in the numbers, according to the report here, the report goes on to say that the abortion rates among women in minority communities have followed the overall downward trend over the 3 decades of legal abortions. At the same time, however, black women consistently have had the highest abortion rates. We're talking about proportionality. Proportionate to the abortion rates among white women. And we're talking about rates. We're talking about not per 1,000 of the population, knowing that when you compare black women as against white women, the population of white women far exceeds that of, because they are the majority, that of black women. So the rates. So while it is that white women have more abortions overall, 1/3, when you look at it in terms of proportionate to their demographics, the number of black people as against the number of white people as against the number of Asians per 1,000 of births. So when you go deeper now, or you say black African Americans, actually abortion rates are highest among that group, followed by Hispanic women. And this was actually from a study that had begun in 2004 up to 2008. But of course, the studies today, the data shows that, of course, that trend continue, but that white women, the rates have increased significantly. And also, as Schulman, Ronkus, and Bucalvelis Inc. had also conducted a study which had started in about 2009, looking at the population of the US, the demographics, and what is going to happen between 2020 and 2025. The population, the majority will be part of the minority will be part of the majority. And of course, white people aren't having as many kids. Probably they're having 2. And then the number of abortion rates are highest, coupled with that. So that speaks to a demographical change. And of course, I have said that there are issues with immigration. Of course, some immigration policies at some periods, depending on probably the party or who is in power, but the immigration policy also sometimes speaks to demographics. This also speaks to the issue of population control. Okay, look at what's happening in China. China had this one-child rule. Now they have abandoned that as their population depletes, as they need more people in their army. That this is a very important conversation that I'm having, and for us to understand when we look at the whole issue of population, the whole issue of strategy, the whole issue of control, the whole issue of preserving the status quo. So of course, it is important, and we hear of this issue of replacement theory, this 18-year-old that is entranced by the what's the name of the group? entranced by the white extremist group and their replacement ideology, killed 10 African Americans at the supermarket. Of course, still driving on this replacement ideology. And of course, and we're hearing this more and more each day. So when we look at, so that is a concern. So it says SRBI, and I was part of us. I was also interviewing people, part of that study, looking at this idea, that looking at how the population will now change. And so when you look at this whole abortion issue, I'm moving beyond just looking at it in terms of a rights issue, but also looking at the issue of population control, or looking at the issue of demographics, looking at what's going on in our country, looking at what's the study which suggests that between 2025 and what's happening with population and birth rates and death rates and so on and so forth, and what has happened with COVID, so the issue of, and millions of people have died to COVID, millions of people have died to various diseases and so on. So these things are part of the conversation that we have to consider.
So I wanted to get into the overturning of the Roe v. Wade decision and kind of state my opinion on that, because it's really important, because what the Supreme Court did was obviously contrary to liberal political and judicial philosophy, as well as actually contrary to conservative political and even judicial philosophy. As Chief Justice John Roberts, a conservative constitutional scholar, very adamantly made clear in his opinion. So it's really important to give some background on Roe v. Wade, because a lot of people that, of course, they say, hey, I support the right to choose, but they don't fully understand all of the history of the Supreme Court's decisions on these matters. So, of course, it started with Roe v. Wade, established a constitutional right to abortion under the 14th Amendment. But what happened in all the cases subsequent to that is what a lot of people don't have a solid grasp on. Everybody had pretty much agreed that, because the first set of questions kind of focused on, the trimester approach. Like first trimester was okay, third trimester not so much, and so the question really came about the second trimester, kind of like where to draw the line. And that was a lot of the case law that was developing. Then the courts started getting into the question of viability. So when can the fetus baby kind of like live outside of the womb on its own? And so that's what they started focusing in on next. And then they started gravitating more towards actual science, as I like to put it. And to me, it has nothing to do with the right to choose or the right to life. It has to do with having a very clear medical and scientific standard of when do we stop calling this a fetus and when do we start calling it a baby? At what point do we deem it to be alive to have constitutional rights and legal protections? The most extreme view would be not until it's out of the womb, right? That's the most extreme view, because that's where they would do those partial birth, late-term abortions, which were just obscene. And even Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg was against that. She did not agree with that. And so, they even passed in Congress, they passed the federal late-term abortion ban. And so it was very clear that was the extreme view. But the question, like I said, became focused really on the second trimester. After the third month, when you get to the fourth month, which is technically, after 12 weeks, you're outside of the 3 months. And so so that's kind of where the big focus was. Where my focus was personally was because we have to have this standard, right? And it's an awkward discussion to have, but you have to be able to say, okay, let me start by saying this. It's easy to define death. We used to define death by saying there's no heartbeat. But then what we ended up finding out with medicine and science is we could keep the heartbeat artificially pumping, we could keep the lungs artificially going because there was brain activity, right? So the person was technically still alive. In fact, we can actually replace the human heart, right, with a machine now that does that function. And so somebody could literally be heartless, and they could still be deemed alive, even though there's no actual heartbeat. But that's actually for like hundreds of years we defined death as, oh, there's no heartbeat, that's it, the person's dead. And then we realized, like, well, no, it's also brain activity. And so if there's no brain activity, then we can deem the person dead. But then people started saying, well, no, because the heart is still beating, the lungs are still breathing, the person's just, what they used to say is like in a vegetable state. But the heartbeat was still going, so we deemed that person to still be alive. And they wouldn't pull the plug unless there was a court order. And so what we ended up realizing and coming to terms with is that it's actually both. Death is defined as the lack of a heartbeat and lack of brain activity. So if that's how we define death, why is that not how we define life? If there's brain activity and if there's a heartbeat, those two combined, the person is alive for all legal purposes and has legal protections and legal rights. And sure enough, that's where conservative constitutional scholars started going towards. And that's why some states started passing the heartbeat laws, right, at 15 weeks, which is technically about like 3.5 months, getting close to the fourth month, because 16 weeks is 4 months. And it was still in that second trimester. It was after week 12, which is technically in the second trimester. And so that was kind of where all the focus was going with these heartbeat laws. Again, I wanted it to focus more on science. So again, we don't define death by lack of a heartbeat, so we can't define life by a heartbeat. It needs a heartbeat plus brain activity. And so what we needed is a lot more studies into that. Like at what point, can the fetus, can the growing baby feel pain? And once you've established that and you've established a heartbeat, then you have a life, and then at that point, there's legal protections. And it has nothing to do with religious philosophy or anything like that. This is pure science. We have to have a sign. We have to draw that line somewhere. And like I said, we all agree that even if the child is still in the womb, like 9 months, at that point, everybody, even Ruth Bader Ginsburg, agrees, like, okay, yeah, there's some constitutional rights that baby has. But we could just never come to a solid agreement on a time frame. And I think with a lot of the conservative justices, it's because they were just heavily influenced by their own religious upbringings and religious beliefs, that they always use the mask and just call that morals. I scrap all that stuff aside. And like I said, I took a very scientific based approach to this. And I just said, look, we have to draw the line somewhere, and we need consistent definitions of life and death. And the heartbeat and the brain activity is solid. And if that's at 15 weeks, then it's at 15 weeks. And we got to come to an agreement on that. And that's actually what Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts, conservative constitutional scholar, wanted. He wanted the courts to uphold the Mississippi law, which would have been, of course, the most extreme in the whole entire country at 15 weeks. And if it had gone to court and people had, litigated it, it would have rested, to me, heavily on the science. If the science was there and the science could prove there's brain activity at 15 weeks and there's a heartbeat at 15 weeks, then by scientific definition, there's life. And if there's life, then there's legal protections involved. So that was where the court was going. By abrogating Roe v. Wade, they undid 50 years of progress in defining this. And they kicked it back to the states. And what I don't even think they fully realized yet is they made it very clear that the federal government should have no say-so in this whatsoever. It was wrong from the get-go. States have total say-so. So technically, that means that the federal late-term abortion ban is also overruled. So congratulations, conservative Supreme Court, you just reintroduced late-term abortions again. So states could go as far now as saying, okay, cool, the federal late-term abortion ban is not valid, we're going to go ahead and reinstitute that. And how in the world is that pro-life? That doesn't make any sense. And so what it does is it just creates inconsistency among all 50 states, and it does affect interstate commerce because people are now going to decide. Because like I'm in Texas, there's a lot of people from California moving here, and it's like that scene from the movie Anchorman when he jumps into the bear pit, and all of a sudden he's just like, I immediately regret this decision. That's exactly what a lot of Californians are feeling right now in Texas. So, it was a bad decision. It's going to affect the way people move around and even where companies decide to set up shop. And especially with some of the states, pushing these extreme positions on abortion. So, to me again, I take a very science-based approach. Um, I I think, well, again, I haven't looked at the science behind it. I don't know if Mississippi or Alabama, I can't remember which state it was. I think it was Mississippi. I can't recall all the science that they had produced. I know that, of course, it was called the heartbeat law for a reason because it was, overemphasized the heartbeat. But like I said, to me, it's like, well, that's not how we define death, so that would be improper. You'd have to demonstrate brain activity as well, which may be 17 weeks or 18 weeks. But that was what 50 years of development was focusing in on, is finally coming to an agreement on where to draw that line so we can finally know, and also women could know um, pretty much what to do, and how much time they have to make that decision before this fetus grows into a baby. And it seems awkward to have this discussion, of course, because this impacts so many people's lives. But unfortunately, this is just what the law is. You have to create these rules, and I prefer rules that are based on logic and science, not superstition and morals, or whatever they want to call it. And I felt like, again, we were headed there, but I really feel like this did a big disservice. And I've had to explain to a lot of people in the pro-life movement, this was not a pro-life decision. They kicked it back to the states, and you're going to have states again reinstitute the late-term abortion ban, or I'm sorry, late-term abortions, because the ban is now effectively unconstitutional, and it's extremely nonsensical. But it also shows just how far right the court has shifted. It's shifted so far right that, I mean, because there's people that are center right, and a lot of their positions are based on soundly on logic and data and science. But the further you go to the right, the more nonsensical it gets, and sometimes they'll do things that they claim are pro-life and it's actually contrary. And so, or they'll say that this is conservative political philosophy and it's anything but, as Chief Justice John Roberts made very, very clear. He was trying to get a hold of the conservatives and basically say, guys, we don't need to go this far. We can uphold the Mississippi law. It'll set 15 weeks, and then the whole debate after that will become science, and maybe we might have to revisit it and up it by 2 weeks or something like that. But he was basically trying to plead with them not to go this extreme, and they went there. So, again, it's this coupled with all the other Supreme Court's decisions that are really just making it clear that they are going to completely change the landscape of the United States, and they are totally willing and ready to strip us of our constitutional rights. They already watered down the Miranda rights, which is kind of scary. Are they preparing for mass arrests? I mean, I don't like getting into hysteria, but you have to start wondering what is up with all these decisions. And now they're taking in the decision as well, which might legitimize an election law legal theory called the independent state legislature theory, where the legislature is basically the one all be all source of election law with no oversight whatsoever. And that is literally what Trump's lawyers were pushing, these fringe legal theories with no support whatsoever. And even within the election law community, they viewed this as like an absurd interpretation of the Constitution. And yet they are doing this. They're watering down our the rights that we have once we're arrested. They're setting the stage for a coup in 2024. There's no other way to interpret this. And I think a lot of people have their head in the sand, and again, it's extremely unfortunate. But there's a lot more that I can go into, but I'll leave my opinion at that, where I just think that this was completely unnecessary, and And yeah, we're just gonna have to see where things go from here.
You're listening to John Castro, who had actually submitted an audio, a comments on some questions I had asked, and he submitted this response, and of course he's talking about January 6th, and we have with us Nolan Fontaine, who's joining us right now in the studios. What's up, Nolan? Dr. Fontaine.
How are you?
I am doing well.
Yeah, just want to say hello, greetings to all the listeners, and from here and around the world.
Yes, and there's a lot happening with the January 6th, and we appreciate Mr. Castro for commenting and helping to dissect what's going on. Any comments? You have any comments on what he had to say?
Absolutely. I think Mr. Castro has a very unique perspective and view in terms of how he sees the world and how he sees things that happen on in the district colony. That's what I call DC, because we know it's not a state, right?
Right.
I do have some reflections and insight just from what I have seen thus far with the January 6th hearing. I'm very baffled that the original slate of Republicans that were submitted to Speaker Pelosi was rejected, and that the only two Republicans on the committee, Representative Liz Cheney and Representative Adam Kinzinger, they're the only Republicans on that committee.
Right.
It troubles me that Liz Cheney is censured in the Wyoming House right now. It also troubles me as an independent voter that there are no independent voters that make up that committee. I know we lost Justin Amash, in the
that
House
is troubling,
and everything. I think that's just very telling of the moment, especially in the moment, post Nina Turner and everything, where Nina Turner didn't win her primary again, and she didn't get any support from the squad.
That is true.
So it's a very telling historical moment, right? One thing that Mr. Castro brought up in regards to President Trump is, the notion that he doesn't need Clinton voters.
Right.
One thing that was very striking to me right before the 2020 election is that, as an independent voter, I follow the Green Party and Libertarian parties very closely.
Yes.
And, it was revealed by Dr. Jill Stein, who did, her money wasn't as long as President Trump's, but she was able to do a state recount in Wisconsin. And, it ended up finding out that at the time, right before the election, 2020 election, Secretary Clinton, once they got, the real numbers, Secretary Clinton actually got less numbers than actually, indicated. So, as an independent voter, having that frame of reference, and then also having the frame of reference when Dr. Cynthia McKinney was primary and redistricted in her Georgia House of Representatives state election, and how she lost because of Diebold, which is now Smartmatic, which is now Dominion voting system. Independent voters have known for a very, very, very long time that there have been, at minimum, irregularities. So, when I heard Mr. Castro say that, President Trump, wasn't able to garner any Clinton voters, I have not seen those numbers, and I would probably agree that he doesn't need Clinton voters, because one thing that he has gained is a lot of Bernie voters. I think a lot of folks have noticed, borrowing from, Mr. Glenn Ford, rest in peace. He was the editor of Black Agenda Report. he's always stood by since 2015 that Senator Bernie Sanders has been the sheepdog candidate for the DNC.
Yeah.
And after the last election cycle, where I saw that Senator Sanders actually signed a memorandum of understanding, you know, pledging allegiance to the Democratic National Convention, even though he is an independent senator. Right. You know, I think that second time around, it really burned a lot of Bernie voters.
Oh, wow.
And the common denominator between that I have noticed in terms of patterns from a political sociology perspective between Bernie voters and Trump voters is the class perspective. And that is one thing that a lot of times Secretary Clinton doesn't really tease out. So I would, you know, kind of, you know, I would assert that President Trump doesn't need Clinton voters because he's got residual Bernie voters and he's got residual independent voters as well. Because at this point in time, we haven't heard anything from the Libertarian Party.
Yeah, we haven't been hearing much from them.
We haven't heard anything from the Green Party just yet. We haven't heard anything from Kanye West yet, if he's going to run, right?
Well,
you know,
so
this is a brain bank of voters that mainstream media, you know, usually does not include into, you know, the everyday equation.
And you know, I wrote an article actually, and I published an article. It's going to be part of my next book as well.
I'd love to read it.
They're talking about, I entitled it Conspiracy Theory, but I have a way with words. I use words very strategically. So it's not really conspiracy theory, but in a sense, if you read, I talked about how people voted in some households,
right?
And if you listen to the podcast, you'll hear what the finding was, you know, because the home was private, a lot of private things happened in the home where the woman who was driven by the Me Too movement also controlled the voting in the home and ensured that she voted for her and her sons, who don't usually vote. And they were saying there was a disproportionate number of, how is it that all these people voted, but our figures suggest that they didn't vote? You know, it's quite alarming. The disparity comes from what happened in the household, and you can't detect what's going on in the household. So I think that's why the Republicans were so forceful in terms of trying to change the law and ensuring that the law prevents something like that. I don't know, but that's why they are asserting that there are irregularities. Some people are asserting it because you can't really tell. You can't prove it. It's difficult to prove.
I mean,
you know?
there has been, and that's one thing that another thing that, you know, really piqued my interest in terms of January 6th and the election irregularities, or at this point election fraud, as they are calling it in certain states like Arizona or Wisconsin, right? And you have specific candidates, like the candidate for governor in Arizona, Carrie Lee.
That's true.
She is specifically calling it out as it is with election fraud, and that being the driving force of what led to that mass mobilization, which, you know, on the trending topics on Twitter at first was calling it the Million MAGA March, right? And now it's turned into January 6th.
Right.
It's turned into this whole ABC production to where, you know, the January 6th committee has actually hired someone from ABC, the news corporation, to produce this 6 or 7 part series regarding January 6th. And I'm very baffled why, you know, Speaker Pelosi didn't entertain any of Kevin McCarthy's picks, like Representative Jim Jordan from Ohio. Blue Dog Republican.
Interesting.
And it's just like, wow, like, you know.
But on another front, this young man running for president is taking a step forward by earlier in the episode, before you were here, I had a breaking news, and I did receive a story from Mr. Castro, who is on January 20 and July 25th. He will be in DC and he will be filing a complaint against the Federal Election Commission in federal court, saying that they cannot allow a candidate to run, Donald Trump, because he's ineligible.
That's huge.
That is huge, and he will have a press conference following that filing, and we're going to be following the story. But so that's happening on that front, and he actually just commented on some of this, and he also made other comments. But we'll be right back after these messages. We have Dr. Nolan Fontaine helping us as well to decipher some of this, what's going on, Roe versus Wade, and there's also the January 6th hearings. That's big. And of course, there's issues of gun reform, but we may not have time to cover that. This is the Neoliberal Round podcast. We'll be right back.
People are getting really impatient with Merrick Garland and the DOJ. They seem to be coming off as very spineless. And the fact that they're also leeching off of a lot of the evidence that's acquired by the January 6th committee has a lot of people wondering, like, what the hell have you guys been doing? Have you not been investigating any of this? How is it that, the January 6th committee has put together all these depositions and questioned all these people? Like, we just presumed that's exactly what DOJ was doing, but apparently they weren't, and they haven't been. And it's now only as a result of these very public hearings that now DOJ feels compelled to take action. And they finally started going state to state and to a lot of these GOP heads and seizing their phones to get the data about the whole, electoral college scam that they were trying to pull on the American people. And so, again, it's very frustrating because we're just really confused as to, like, what the thought process on Merrick Garland is. We know that he's an institutionalist, and so he's going to try to do everything that he can to preserve the institutions. And what my personal thought is that he just does not want to charge a former president. It makes us look like a banana republic, and it sets a really bad precedent, of indicting and trying to prosecute a former president. Plus, if you indict Trump, even if you put him on trial, there's going to be somebody on the jury that voted for him, right? It was a very contentious election, 50-50. There's no way you could get, 12 neutral people that wouldn't be biased in favor of the president. And so I think his fear is, look, guys, like, if we indict Trump and we take him to court and we can't lock in a conviction because of his popularity, think about the damage that that's going to do in the future and how much that's going to embolden Trump to now know that no jury could ever convict him because he's too damn popular. And then he's going to be emboldened to do whatever the hell he wants, versus right now he's a little bit scared. And so I think that what they're doing is employing a strategy of pretty much like strategic inaction. Like, let's not do anything. And that way Trump knows he's on eggshells. But what they don't know about Trump's personality is the inaction is actually emboldening him even more. It's making him even more confident that they're never going to do anything and that he is above the law. And I think that's the bigger danger that Merrick Garland is not putting into his calculation. Like I said, I understand, and I should say that when I said that, there's confusion in the legal community, it's everybody else. I understand Merrick Garland's position on this. Like I said, he's an institutionalist. He doesn't want to set a bad precedent as far as, indicting a former president, and then also the likelihood of conviction is practically zero. And so he's scared that taking a swing and missing is actually going to, again, embolden Trump even more. But my response to that is not doing anything is going to embolden him more than anything. And it's not protecting us from the very real, clear, and present danger and threat that he poses to our constitutional republic. He has it out to destroy the republic that elected a black president, that humiliated him at the White House correspondent dinner. That's what this is all about. It was all about his pride being destroyed that day and him coming back to teach everybody a lesson. And I really believe he has every intention of destroying this republic. And unfortunately, we laid the foundation for it, not keeping, endless amounts of dark money out of politics. And it's just bad. But we'll have to see how everything goes. But my only hope is that when the Supreme Court is afforded the chance to hear the merits of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment applying against Trump, that they'll do the right thing and that they'll vote to kick him off the ballot. And if anything, they do it because Murdoch and the Koch brothers want this, right? And a lot of the more institutional GOP conservative base, the old guard, want to get rid of Trump, right? Because they want DeSantis. So we're hoping that at the very least, because again, I don't. I'm center right, but I'm not that far right. These nut jobs obviously scare me, and I know that DeSantis is pretty far right, but at least he's not unhinged. At least he's not likely medically insane and out to destroy our republic. Of course, I have a lot of things that I'll likely disagree with politically with DeSantis, but again, he doesn't pose the type of existential threat that I believe Trump poses to our republic. And so my hope is that what the January 6th committee has done is really laid all the factual foundation to prove that Trump was involved. He partook, organized, and orchestrated and executed an insurrection in attempt to stage a seemingly lawful coup under the guise of false pretenses about, a fake electoral scam, and that, the election was rigged, which everybody knows is BS. So yeah, we'll have to see how it goes, but I don't know. With the way the court is going, the Supreme Court, it's not looking good.
Welcome back to the Neoliberal Round podcast. There's some breaking news coming in regarding Donald Trump and his 2020 presidential run or candidacy. I think we still have Dr. Nolan Fontaine here with us, and he was telling us just now, updating us that on July 4th, Independence Day, Donald Trump may decide or will announce whether or not he will run in the 2024 presidential candidate. In the 2024 presidential race.
Yes, we are seeing some sources, a source so far that he may be declaring on Independence Day.
Okay.
So I specifically, from a sociological perspective, I'm trying to identify particular patterns that may give us particular signs that point to that. It's one thing to go, on certain sources or a source.
I agree. I agree with you. Mm-hmm. I know what you're going to say, of course.
But it's very telling, and it would be very Trump-like if he did do that.
Okay. Yes, that if he runs.
Or if he announces on July 1st, given
July 4th.
Sorry, July 4th. I'm thinking Canada Day.
That's cool. Yes.
Yeah, on July 4th, yes. Because of the current underpinning, that current, movement of America First.
Yeah, and what that means, Independence Day, America Great Again. I mean, he is going to announce that he is running. I mean, there's no doubt about it.
It'll definitely be interesting, mirroring what our current executive and the White House.
Yes.
May what their narrative may be on Independence Day. So it'll be interesting seeing how both sides kind of posit towards that. Right.
That is true. And you said there was more breaking news coming in. News alert.
Yeah, I also am seeing trending news on Twitter that Trump may be exploring a possibility of running with Ron DeSantis in 2024.
Oh, wow. Okay. Oh, wow. This is interesting.
As I said, that's just something that's trending right now on Twitter.
Wait, hold up.
It's only one source that I've seen thus far.
I mean, if that happens, it would really make the conversation. It would change the game and what we've been saying, because
it would.
I think we've been hearing that that the Republican Party is now rallying behind DeSantis, thinking that Donald Trump is imploding because of the January 6th. But now we are hearing Donald Trump is about to announce his candidacy on a very significant and important day.
Yeah.
And not only that, but there is rumors somewhere there that he might
trending news with one current source that we confirmed that he may consider Ron DeSantis Republican governor of Florida.
Oh wow!
For me, looking at it from a political sociological perspective, that would leave a question mark over who would be the governor of Florida, right?
Lieutenant governor probably. Is there an election this year? I don't think.
I don't know, I've not read Florida's state constitution.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know if that would automatically spur a special election, or, as you said, if the lieutenant governor would.
Probably. Well, yes, sure. Maybe for 2 years. But is the lieutenant governor a Democrat though?
I'm not sure.
Because sometimes you have the lieutenant governor as a Democrat and the governor is a Republican in some cases.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that happened sometime before, and when that's.
I'm not familiar with that case, but I've heard on the federal level that happened. Specifically with Abraham Lincoln and Andrew Jackson.
Yes.
So I think it'll be interesting within the next few days, especially on Independence Day. I think it'll be interesting as well with the different gubernatorial races.
Right.
As I was saying, I've got my eye on Arizona. I've also been looking at Wisconsin's House of Representative race. Liz Cheney will be also primary this go around. So it'll be interesting seeing.
Do you think she has a chance of winning? Because
monetarily, absolutely, she's a chimney. And
well, yes, that's true. But with what's happening with how they have in a sense attacked her own party, in a sense, trying to silence it. Liz Cheney, do you think she will?
Silence is a strong word.
Censure her, whatever the case might be.
Yes. Like I said, she's related to Dick Cheney at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Dick Cheney has been in D.C., on Capitol Hill, on K Street, in the White House. So she already has the master game book in terms of how to run a good election campaign.
And the Bushes probably as well. The Bushes
probably so.
Yes.
So and then the other thing that I am wondering about is the American First candidate out of the Republican wing that will arise out of Wyoming.
Right.
Right now, it's looking like Harriet Hageman.
Oh.
Who's looking like she's going to rise to the top, and the Trump-backed, Republican candidate out of Wyoming. So for me, this weekend, it'll be very interesting seeing how both of those, both Representative Cheney and Ms. Hagerman.
Ms. Hagerman, yes. How they? When is the election? For that, is it November coming?
I think
November,
it's it's a midterm election.
Okay, fine. And all right, okay. This is quite interesting. We are following all the news, and this is a very interesting time in America. There's so much happening. Earlier I was speaking with you as well, and you said that you were carjacked.
Sorry?
Earlier you said you were carjacked.
Oh, yes. And I also won. I won the fight.
And earlier, actually I was trying to record you earlier, but I didn't get it. I lost it. But and I was saying to you that there's some carjacking is. I didn't realize that people. I mean, my car was stolen in January. I didn't realize that people were still carjacking, and it's on the rise. And I say to you, part of the reason what's going on with a police officer said to me some time ago in Philadelphia, the reason why they're not able to resolve the problem is that they keep releasing these young men. They keep releasing as soon as they arrest them and turn them over to the district attorney, the prosecutor, they have to release them because let me tell you why. Because right now I'm supposed to be making some kind of. Okay, my car was stolen. I'm trying not to give too much information about the case because the case is still before the courts. Okay, but my car was stolen and they caught one of the perpetrators. And I have not been. Yes, it's good in one sense, but no, I have not been contacted. I have tried to contact the district attorney's office.
Have you contacted the Pennsylvania Victim Compensation Hotline?
Yes, I did.
That's great.
And it took me a while, 2 months almost. And then the next thing I know, the young lady doesn't work there anymore.
This is bureaucracy.
Nothing is happening, so you wonder what's going on. Incompetence, no follow through. I'm really not happy about this, and I think that's what's going on. That's why the cases are not being resolved, because people are not doing their jobs.
It's really disheartening in terms of, what's going on at the municipal level. And, I've had conversations with, folks on the left, some centrist or moderate folks, and even some folks on the right, and even folks on the very far margins. So the whatever you want to call them, the alt right or Trump right, or the hyper left or alt left or onk left, whatever you want to call them today. And it seems like that one common denominator that folks are worried about, even on the municipal level, is the infiltration of globalists. So, folks who are backed by folks more on a global scale, World Economic Forum, Davos, Bilderberg Group, things of that nature. Some things which folks would say maybe a little bit unsubstantiated. One thing that I've been noticing in terms of patterns is that that is one, I don't want to say worry, but it is a concern when you see it happening in not just Philadelphia but other major cities around America.
Right.
So, just identifying that pattern in whether I'm talking to working class, American Indians, or lower middle class, European Americans, or, lower middle class, Black Americans or African Americans or, Latino Americans, what have you. There does seem to be a concern of if folks are, especially with Citizens United, massive amounts of money, corporations giving campaign funds, right?
Yes.
If these candidates are really like American, backed candidates, or are they really corporate backed candidates? We know there's a fine line that some folks have to walk.
yes. And I did an article on a podcast actually on who rules America, and then I did another follow up, and I even wrote a paper on that, and I did a follow up on in the neoliberal commentary on the world. The world now has two more global challenges. So I talk about William Domhoff's book on who rules America, who we talked about corporations. But now I say who rules corporations, and I say China.
Wow.
And then I talk about.
I was about to ask you, what was the most insightful thing that you kind of
I said China, because China takes advantage. of our brand of economic system, takes advantage of our capitalism, which is now about nepotism and greed. And so China studies us and they understand us. So what they do is that now they have created a thing where people like NBA, the NBA
Absolutely.
would grovel or acquiesce to China, and they lost billions of dollars. Now they're back with China.
Wow.
Okay.
And you're talking in regards to the LBJ situation.
Yes, and look, and I think John Cena. There's an issue with John Cena, and
yes,
I think you heard.
I've heard.
And he had to walk back. He sent an apology, and I think we carried it on the podcast, and also HBO. Bill Maher had a show, and we also carried that on the podcast with Bill Maher talking about it as well. But so we said, of course, China, and then of course we talk about China and Russia and their strategy and so on and so forth.
Looking at the whole with BRICS.
Yes. And we talk about, but listen at the whole issue of power as a strategy and so on. So we did talk about that, but here you are, sharing and giving us an insight about corporate America and who actually guides these politicians. How do they make decisions? Of course, we know we know America. We know the country is built on religious ideology. I heard. Of course, based on the Constitution, yeah. But of course, there's also this freedom of religion.
That is also a pattern that I've not only seen in the U.S. Constitution, but multitudes of state constitutions. The only exception that, and I'll shout out my colleague, my fellow genealogist, Phoenix Moon. The only constitution that we've come across so far that has something different would be the state of Oklahoma. We look more so at constitutions from an American Indian perspective. So it's interesting for us that...
Yes, right. Do you have your own constitution?
Who?
As a tribe. As American Indian tribe, original tribe, would your American Indian tribe have, or is it part of the Constitution?
Oh, American Indians are a part of the U.S. Constitution and some state constitutions, right?
Okay.
Where there's acknowledgement, because we know that the Iroquois Confederation was integral in crafting, the U.S. Constitution.
Okay.
So, there's also remnants of Indians in there as well.
Yes.
So there are certain tribes, certain nations that do have their individual, respective bylaws or constitutions as well.
Right. And there's one more point that I wanted to follow up, because I followed up. I know you talked about car theft and the rise in car theft and the issue of poverty. We did.
Let's go back to that.
Poverty is really spiraling out of control, and you had commented on that earlier, which I wanted to capture that. What do you and there's been several initiatives, Stop the Violence campaign, marching, gun reform. Of course, there's the new the Safer Community, the bipartisan Safer Communities Act. So do you think any of this will work, or is going to work, or has been working, and what do you see is the real issue or the solution to some of the car theft and so on? And of course, I said of incompetence from the district attorney level, because they're not doing their jobs. Okay, but apart from that, what anything else?
I think all those are definitely variables that need to be held.
Yeah.
I also, going back to like an American Indian perspective, as I became acquainted with my family, my lineage, and really understood who I was, it also made me wonder, like, wow, like how many other young bulls families have taken the time to sit down and be like, yo, like, do you understand? Do you know who your great grandfather was? Your third great grandfather, your third great grandmother, the contribution that they gave to our family, whether they're American Indian or not.
Yeah.
I think it's one, an identity problem, because a lot of times you have young boys and sisters, sometimes too, and other folks, right?
Yes.
That don't have a stable, you know, situation at home.
Yes.
Or don't understand, you know, their familial identity and everything.
Yeah.
Sometimes that turns into them looking for family through friends. Which is great. And sometimes it turns into looking for family in the streets. Sometimes that's gang life. Which isn't so great.
Yes.
And you know, I just, from that perspective, like the American Indian perspective, I see that. And then I think you also asked, you know, are those types of programs working?
Yeah.
I think those are very neoliberalist programs, right?
Yeah.
At the heart of it, not to say that they're good or bad. That's kind of how I couch them, you know, from a socio-political level, right? And at the same time, I think historically, like when I talk to old heads about things that existed back in the day, so different YMCAs that existed in the city and how those were funded.
Yeah.
Boys and girls clubs. And it really brings me back to a historical moment where I'm like, wow, I'm kind of stuck, because it kind of reminds me of like that 1880s moment in U.S. history that we kind of refer to as the Gilded Age.
Right.
But then economically, right, you know, we're in a post-war recession, right, because we're just coming out of Afghanistan. So it kind of reminds me of like that kind of Roaring 20s, Calvin Coolidge, you know, post-World War I, post-Woodrow Wilson, like, you know, liberal internationalism period. It kind of seems as though that, you know, on a global and national level, we're trying to reorient ourselves with liberalism. Another trending topic that I just saw is like this whole quote unquote liberal world order that's trending, that President Biden, or the 46th executive, whatever, you know, we choose to call him, that's a term that's been trending, and we know that in the past there has been, you know, a kind of knee-jerk reaction behind the phrase New World Order. Right. So, you know, I think that kind of encapsulates, you know, the conversation from like, you know, a familial a social, a kind of like social organizational level, a structural level, and a systemic level or a global level, right? Of how kind of, I think these programs good in some sense, and like, you know, at the heart of them, we need to understand politically that they are neoliberal, and we have to identify, you know, community, municipality to municipality, to see if this is a good fit for your respective community.
And I know exactly what you are alluding to, why you speak how you speak just now, saying looking at the programs and whether or not these programs or ideas are fit for communities. I have said that funding, they're not reaching the people at the community level, and I had a discussion recently about that with Mr. Castro as well and several other people. It's not reaching, and probably that's one of the reasons, as you said. So it's quite interesting that you would actually make a comment about that. And then there we go with rice. And then, of course, what's going on? People are now turning to crime and violence, and because the programs are not reaching people and are providing a good fit. I mean, California. You see what's going on in Cali, bro?
With the
relief. Well, how much they're giving? How much money they're giving?
Oh, I have seen that, and
I
actually posted. I posted a meme about that. It was a SpongeBob meme, and it was like this big balloon, and it was like, oh my God, it can't possibly get any bigger. And then the balloon it had 8.6% inflation.
Yes.
And then at the bottom it had Patrick, and it was like $1,000+ relief checks in California.
Right.
Like, just wait a moment.
Yes.
So, from a state perspective, I'm wondering like how that will affect inflation on a state level for California. I'm wondering how that will affect gas and excise tax in California. California is also in the midst of I think reparations conversations with some folks that can prove a genealogical tie to I believe being either enslaved or indentured servants. So
quite progressive,
it's a very
quite humanitarian.
It's a very interesting time in California.
This governor
if that's something that you subscribe to. I was very shocked to see the recall last year for the governor, and also shocked to see that he won. But it's interesting to see what's going on out there right now. And I think we're at a very interesting moment, given where we are in terms of inflation, stagflation, economically on the global level as well, right? Even going back to your statement on China and everything. They're at economic hegemon now.
They have a market. They have a market now. They are very strategic, but there's so much more that can be said. And of course, this is the Neoliberal Round podcast, and we are having a treat with Dr. Nolan Fontaine, who has joined the show today, and I'm so happy that he could come on, and he's gonna be joining us on several other occasions, because it's great that he can come and help us dissect some of and provide information as to what's going on in America and the world. This is the Neoliberal Round podcast. We'll be right back after this to wrap up. We have one correction to our previous episode. We had mentioned that Clarence D. Thomas was the first African American justice to the Supreme Court. We misspoke. We actually meant Thurgood Marshall, who was nominated by Lyndon B. Johnson on June 13th, 1967. But the idea that we wanted to drive home was the idea of the prominence being accorded to an African American, the prominence or the opportunity to sit on the Supreme Court, a high court, which is not something that is usually accorded to African Americans. Of course, we have one justice. And so we looked at the reaction at the time. So we spoke about the reaction of this particular news and what some people were saying at the time when the news came out that he had raped some woman. And so to say now that President Joe Biden is somewhat responsible is laughable. But thank you for listening to the Neoliberal Round podcast. Join us tomorrow or later in the week for more exciting episodes as we continue to explore issues in the news. One of the news that we're going to have to get to is we haven't done a podcast as it relates to what's going on in Ukraine and with Russia. We will have that for you coming up on one of our next podcasts. We haven't done a podcast since the last one we did in season 2. So we haven't done a podcast recently on Ukraine, Russia, but we have done several podcasts, several episodes covering the whole Ukraine, Russia war. But we will get to that soon. And we are yet to do the podcast with Professor, my good friend from Holy Cross University, Professor Andre Corrine. And so as soon as we get him, we will have that for you. And of course, we continue to follow the news as it relates to the January 6 hearings and with what's happening regarding the overturning of Roe and what some states are doing. Some of the immediate actions have been taken from some states. One, of course, Texas is one of those states that took immediate actions to ban certain and to restrict certain funding and any kind of wiggle room around the law that allows for people to giving them temporary stays, but because some people want the law to be effective immediately. But we will continue to have these discussions. This is part 2. We continue with part 3 of this series, but we continue to look at other issues in the news, as I said. The Neoliberal Round is brought to you by the Neoliberal Corporation. I am your host and the producer, Ronaldo C. McKenzie, and I'm also the author of Neoliberalism, Globalization, Income Inequality, Poverty, and Resistance. If you haven't gotten your book, please, it's available in all platforms worldwide. And also, just so you know, you can visit us at RonaldoCMcKenzie.com and theneoliberal.com. The Neoliberal is serving the world today to solve tomorrow's challenges. And of course, we are all about making popular what was the monopoly, which is the aim of communication. Donate to us at https://anchor.fm/the neoliberal/support. And send us a feedback and share the show with your friends. What good?